Hello, this is Unsung with GameLeap, and in this very exciting video, we're going to be covering all of the map changes to Season 14, as well as the monster changes that are accompanying them. There are some really cool changes here, including buffs to split pushing, changes to the map's geometry as a whole, as well as 3 different Baron types. Let's go ahead and get right into this video, starting off with the first new jungle camp. It would seem that we are correct in last video's assumption. The Rift Herald has been replaced by Voidgrubs for its first spawn. Voidgrubs spawn at 5 minutes and then despawn at 14 minutes to give room for Rift Herald once again. When you start to fight these Voidgrubs, they'll actually release a swarm of these mini mobs called Voidmites that will then attack you as well. In the last video, we saw a small preview of the Voidmites popping out of the Rift Herald's back after it completes a charge. Each Voidgrub killed gives your team a permanent damage over time bonus damage to turret buff. This buff stacks based on the amount of Voidgrubs that you've actually slain. If you kill 5 Voidgrubs, then you'll also spawn these Voidmites to help you push periodically. The buff caps out at 6 Voidgrubs, and there's only 6 that spawn over the course of a game. These Voidgrubs are an early game menace and will be a requirement for any split pusher or siege composition. This will definitely draw the jungle and the bot lane towards topside even more than they currently do, as I'm sure that you're quite aware the first Rift Herald spawn is pretty important to get and the bot lane normally rotates up to it. This being a permanent buff means that it will have a lasting impact in the game from up to 5 minutes, so we should see a little bit more river skirmishing. If you are a jungler, I would highly recommend that you prioritize taking these Voidgrubs because they are super important for your game plan as a whole. The bonus damage to structures was so strong that it got removed from Earthdrake previously, just to give you an idea of how good this is. The bonus damage over time for the turrets by itself is a really strong mechanic. However, the Voidmites will more than likely end up pulling the backdoor protection away from turrets, allowing you to actually go and backdoor objectives without needing a minion wave nearby. This is a huge buff to the Hullbreaker champions and split pushing top laners as a whole, which of course will increase the impact of this role as well. Just a quick reminder, if you want to learn any champions for Season 14, head on over to GameLeap.com, where we offer extensive courses on every single champion in the game. See you on the site. Now that we talked about the new Voidgrubs, the buff that they give, and how they impact gameplay, let's go ahead and look at new Rift Herald. The new Rift Herald spawns at 14 minutes after all the Voidgrubs despawn, but is only there for 6 minutes. In order to increase the strength of this monster appropriately for its limited spawn timer, there is some changes to Rift Herald overall. The eye is still crushable and it will send Rift Herald walking down a lane as before, but we now have the option to actually join Rift Herald and steer it around. This is most similar to a battle sled that is present in Arena or Nexus splits, but it also deals damage to towers like a Scion ultimate. If a champion is present inside of this new controllable battle sled Shelly, it will do increased damage to turrets and then also give you a little bit of buffing when you do pop out. From what we've seen before, there seems to be some sort of shield and then also a purple hued buff that lingers after you pop out of Shelly, as well as a new spawn of Voidmites. That's not all, because we can also drive Shelly into enemy champions, knock them up, and damage them. The current Rift Herald does this as well, but it's kind of inconsistent and it only goes in a linear path. This will allow you to engage if you're playing a non-engaged champion for your team, which has some really huge gameplay implications. Imagine we're playing a champion like Zed. Zed doesn't really have any backline access unless he consumes his W, Living Shadow. Now, if we're playing Zed and we drive the Rift Herald into the enemy backline and crash it into a wall near them, they'll get knocked up, we pop out, and then we can immediately use Deathmark and hold onto our W afterwards. This is a huge buff for those types of champions. Neeko is another great example. For Neeko, it's kind of hard to get into an enemy team unless we commit our flash or a rocket pelt. Now we can get a pseudo engage from Rift Herald. We're able to act on the enemy backline without having to commit all of our resources. These are just a few examples of the cool and creative things that are present in this new season. Another unspoken buff to this Rift Herald is the fact that it spawns multiple monsters. As I'm sure that you know, if you spawn a Rift Herald, it's kind of hard to contest the champion underneath the turret because you will take aggro immediately as soon as they're done killing the Rift. Shelly only makes this easier because she actually turns around after she swipes the turret, exposing her eye to your enemies. Now, these Voidmites that spawn near the Rift Herald will prevent you from taking tower aggro and also give you an avenue to take a turret even if you're being contested by a solo champion. This makes Rift Herald an even more important buff to take than it currently is, because it's a limited strong tower one-shot that also gives you a minion wave that you don't have to wait for. This is yet another buff to split pushing and to squishy champions as a whole. That pretty much covers all the new Rift Herald changes. Let's go ahead and talk about the new Baron. New Baron has an interesting mechanic that works similarly to the Elemental Dragon. There are 3 new variants of Baron Nashor, and each one of them has a different effect on the map as well as a different attack pattern. The spawns on these Barons are completely RNG, so let's go ahead and break down each one of them so you know exactly what they do. All the Barons when slain grant the same buff that they did as before. There is no changes here. The Hunting Baron is now the quote normal Baron. This Baron variant leaves the pit unchanged, but it does AoE damage with lightning attacks from above. This will of course make the Baron a little bit harder to take. This is significantly more terrifying than it is currently. As I'm sure that you all know, taking current Baron is kind of a joke. A more even damage spread on our backline will give the enemy team more options to contest, as well as making it just flat out more dangerous. Our next Baron variant is going to be the Territorial Baron. This Baron spawns a wall in front of the Baron pit. This is scary because this Territorial Baron will use his arms to grab all nearby champions and pull them towards him. This is really scary for a few reasons. the most obvious being the threat of Wombo combo. Let's say that you're trying to take Baron as a long-range composition, the arms come and pull you directly into an Orianna ball placed in front of the Baron. This means that we'll not actually be able to use our range to our advantage and will always be under threat. The new wall only makes this worse because we can't immediately back out of the pit, instead we only take one of two choke points. So far these variants are really cool, but the last Baron, the All-Seeing Baron, is by far the coolest. The All-Seeing Baron will create a tighter choke around the front of the Baron pit, but open up the top and the bottom of it. This means that we're going to be fighting this Baron primarily from either top or bot side. This by itself is a nice change to the terrain. However, there is a mechanic that makes it very scary to fight it from the top or the bottom side. The All-Seeing Baron opens up void rifts that create a damage over time zone within the new tunnels. This will result in huge damage being dealt to your team because Baron actually does shred your resistances as well. The new limited area to work with here will also make it harder for the winning team to actually take the Baron without being contested. Once again, that threat of Wombo is ever present. Just imagine how strong a Jarvan ultimate into a Rumble ultimate will be while that Baron is opening up portals that are shredding your team. The changes to Barons seem relatively minor, but they'll make the game significantly more exciting because there's going to be so many different avenues to come back and actually fight the enemy team instead of playing the purely PvE game or sneaking a Baron out of nowhere. If you like or dislike these changes, let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the GameLeap YouTube channel so we can keep you in the loop for everything that happens in Season 14. We're going to be covering the new items as soon as possible, so make sure that you stay tuned for that video. Speaking of the PvE side of things, the new Baron will also corrupt the map at 20 minutes. Changing the way that red, blue, and Scuttlecrab work. The new Voidborn versions of the blue buff and the red buff are much more durable, so you're going to need multiple members of your team to actually take them out. The reward for taking out the buffed up version of red and blue is that all living members of your team are granted that respective buff, so we don't actually have to fight with people over it anymore. This is just a win-win situation and will of course bring your resource management down a little bit, making the game easier to learn. That being said, there is also a significantly higher reward for the enemy team for contesting your buff. If they secure it for themselves, of course they're going to be way more strong than they were previously. The post 20-minute Rift Scuttler will also respawn as a Voidborn Scuttler. When slain, this Scuttler will send out a massive Scryer's Bloom-esque effect or a sweeper that will reveal all wards, reducing them to 1 HP like it does for the Chemtech plants. This Vision Aura grants sight of enemy champions and also still gives you the Scuttle Shrine like it does currently. In order to compensate for the strength of this buff, the Rift Scuttler has been increased in size and durability as well. Every single new neutral objective on the Summoner's Rift is going to be important to contest and overall increases the value of teamwork. Hopefully, to go along with these new changes, Riot won't make it a cardinal sin to ping your allies and type to them. But let's go ahead and nip our expectations in the bud. I doubt that this will happen. To pair up with the new increased value in Baron overall, the Elemental Drakes have also seen a slight rework. Certain Drakes, like Mountain Drake, have had their terrain removed, and Infernal Drake has been reworked completely. The new Infernal Drake is going to drop cinders around the map that you could stack sort of like Ravenous Hydra. The cinders will give you a burst of movement speed, kind of like Cloud Drake, and then will give you a permanent stat buff that Infernal Drake already gives, so more than likely just AD and AP percentage increases. What makes this really cool is that on death, you'll actually lose some of your stacks, and then the enemy team or your allies can go and pick them up. Another really neat change for Infernal Drake is that it won't take away your bushes. As you know, if you're playing Rengar or Qiyana or something on Infernal Rift, it becomes more difficult to use every single aspect of your kit. Rengar loses his jump while he gains AD, and Qiyana will lose access to some of the brushes around River, making it harder for her to stealth. This new center mechanic, as well as leaving the bushes around, will make more champions able to fight more consistently and not really change the Vision game too much. Great rework. Now that we covered all of the new important neutral objectives and PvE changes, let's go ahead and talk about terrain. First and foremost, let's go ahead and cover the terrain changes to top lane. Now the walls have been extended towards the middle of the lane a little bit more, granting red side more time to react to the enemy jungler just straight up walking up river. As I'm sure that you know, it's a lot easier to defend yourself from a dive on the blue side. Now red side is equally as defensible. There has also been a new bush added closer to the red side turret to kind of make it easier for the enemy team to dive once they're in position, but we'll also have more warning because we can simply just ward the tri-bush now. Warding tri-bush covers 3 different approaches. We can kind of see if the enemy jungler is going to walk towards the top side bush, we could see if they're coming from our red buff, and we could also see if they're walking in the river. The changes here make top lane on red side a lot more defensible and not give blue side such a huge advantage anymore. Moving from top lane closer to both the pits, we have a new thinner wall that's been cut from the previously thick wall. This thinner wall grants us a larger area to actually dodge skill shots and to fight the enemy team in. While being a direct buff to river skirmishing, these create new chokes to make control mages even more impressive. This is really cool because it's going to change the dynamic of how we want to contest both Drake and Baron, as well as the effectiveness of some champions in these areas. As I'm sure that you know, it's harder to play Fiddlesticks and ult people that are closer to the center of the Drake pit, but with this new wall change, we can do this every single game. The changing of this jungle terrain will be felt every single game of League of Legends that you play, so make sure that you study this map extensively. Now that we covered the outside edges of the map, let's go ahead and talk about the inner edges of the map. Mid lane has seen significant terrain changes as well as an adjustment of the brush placement. First and foremost, the brush that are placed in river have been moved back slightly. Huge buff to control mage safely as long as we fight in the direct center of our lane. This is also a slight buff to assassins as well because we don't have to worry about the entire enemy team 5-manning us at 3 minutes now. Walking these bushes back of course push gives us more time to react and reduces the effectiveness of gap closures being used from the bushes. Now Rengar can't jump into the center of our lane and jump scare us from basically either side of the river if we're slightly off center. With these changes, a Jarvan EQ is not a death sentence, and a Kha'Zix that isolates us won't be able to one-shot us before we're able to react. While these are buffs for the center of the lane, it's actually kind of scary for us to be near our turret now because there's been a new bush added and the fat wall has been cut in half. Once we're underneath our turret, we're actually going to be quite vulnerable to the enemy jungler at all times. So we want to be playing mid to actually play mid and fight for wave control in the center of the lane instead of worrying about the enemy team constantly ganking us and getting pushed underneath our turret. These small changes to terrain will have lasting impact on gameplay. Now if we're playing a control mage and we're stuck underneath our turret, there's actually a threat of the enemy team being able to kill us over and over again. But if we're able to fight for mid control, keep the wave pushed up in the center, then we have more room to work with and therefore more room to be safe. These changes are going to be real exciting for pro play, I promise you. Now let's talk a little bit more about the top lane and the bot lane changes that have been shipped. The bot lane has received a new wall as well, and the bushes that were present in both top and bot have been pulled away from the wall and placed more towards the center of the river. This will make it harder for both teams to contest for vision and also kind of reduce the effectiveness of junglers on bot lane. As I'm sure that you know, ganking bot has been the meta for a long time. If you have a winning bot lane, this usually translates into winning bot side, which then translates into winning Drake and then winning Rift Herald later on. Having less jungler presence in this lane is both a good and a bad thing. This means that your game won't be decided by bot cap as often, but counter matchups are going to be more effective in this lane as a whole. Red side bot lane has been buffed here as well, making it harder for the enemy jungler to actually gank from the tri-bush. It's been moved back significantly, and a wider portion of the lane doesn't have Fog of War in it. Now bot lane red side is not going to be as scary for the enemy jungler to dive. And with that, we're going to wrap up all the Season 14 changes to Summoner's Rift. These are incredible changes and exactly what we've been needing in League of Legends for a long time. I personally am really excited to play on this new refreshed version of Summoner's Rift. The map has felt old and tired for a while now. Fantastic changes from Riot. I'm really excited for Season 14. Anyways, this is Unsung with Gamely. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys in the next video.